Item number 20, the Mayor Pro Tem wanted to be here for both of these. She had to leave at 4:30 for a few minutes. I'm going to suggest that at this point we take a 15-minute break and we come back at 5 o'clock, see if we can knock out item 20 and then the Kroll report. Oh, there you are. I'd still recommend we take a break.
Well, Mayor,
Yes.
just to be clear, does that mean then is this in essence our dinner break? Or are we still intending to take a dinner break? Could we just talk about the timing with regard to that piece?
Yeah, I don't know how long 20 is going to take, because the item for 20 is either to vote no or to postpone. So I don't think that's going to take that long, because we're not parsing language. It's got to be a question, do you want to postpone it, or do you just want to vote no, best as I can tell from looking at the message board. That gets us then to Kroll report. I think we can probably get both. I think we could get both of these two things done.
By 5:30, when we usually take a dinner break? Or?
No, but probably by 6, because we have the Kroll report to go.
Yeah, I think I think we'll have some substantial conversation around it for sure. Anyway, I'm fine with taking a break. I just want to have kind of a reasonable expectation of how we're going to manage our time from there. So if we're not taking a dinner break, say till 7, probably some of us are going to need to grab a snack.
Let's take
I just
it.
want to use our time really efficiently from
right.
here on
Let's
out.
try and
So-
get done by 7.
Let's see if we can be done by 7. Let's see if we can be done by 6 or 6:30. The Kroll report's going to take up to an hour. I don't know how much longer the other aspect is going to take. Okay? All right, 10-minute break, and then we'll come back. Mayor Pro Tem is with us virtually. We have everybody else on dais. Councilmember Kassar is not here. Who else are we missing?
Councilmember Poole?
Yeah, Councilmember Poole. I'm going to reconvene the Austin City Council meeting here at 5:13. Today is the 21st of October, 2021. We have 2 items left to deal with, item number 20 and the Kroll report. I think we should begin with item number 20, and then we'll do the Kroll deal. Councilmember Alter, you pulled this.
Thank you. I did pull this. I have some comments, and then I'd like to ask some questions of staff, if the park staff can be on first. Just wanted to let them know that while I make some remarks. I want to make sure that I'm heard, so I'm going to take this off because this is pretty important to me. I'm ready to deny this request to freeze our parkland dedication fees and to open the Pandora's box of how we calculate these. We passed this fee increase unanimously in the budget in August. It was posted and noticed just like everything else in the city manager's proposed budget. I believe that this item sets up a false choice between parks and affordability that council did not ask the city manager to put before us. We passed the increase unanimously in the budget, and no policy change led to the increases in the fees. Rather, it was a formula that was designed to address the fact that the cost of land that is used in the formula increases. That resulted from a drawn-out, difficult stakeholder process. So we have a formula that takes into consideration for once that the cost of land in Austin is rising, and that was something that was ironed out in 2016 and 2015 with a very involved stakeholder process with many of the players who are complaining about that fee. I think it's really important that we remember that Austin loves our parks. Every development in our city is assessed a myriad of fees to cover the cost of roads and sidewalks, utilities, inspections, permitting staff. And as the cost of services rise, those fees also rise. To single out parkland, in my view, as a unique cost driver is misguided. I also want to say that we have a responsibility to not think just about short-term, but also long-term. And as we know from our affordable housing issues, we wish we had land banked a long time ago. And what the parkland dedication process allows us to do is land banking for parks and making sure that we are taking care of the needs of our growing city. I have a lot more to say about this topic. I'm hoping that we'll have an opportunity to be brief and that there will be folks who agree with me. I do want to ask some questions of the Parks Department to get us started, and then I will pass the mic to somebody else who wants to speak on this issue. So it looks like Liana is on there. Good evening. Can you tell me roughly what percentage of our parkland acquisition acreage has been in the Eastern Crescent since 1998?
Thank you for asking. And I want to say that during the last few years and as part of the long-range plan, the department has reviewed parkland acquisitions throughout the city. We actually submitted a memo to council in September of 2020 in response to a similar question. And the last page of that memo includes a map with land acquisitions since 98. And 98 was actually a year where we received, where a bond was passed, and it had a significant allocation of funding for land acquisitions. And I want to mention that Randy Scott, who is the program manager for parkland dedication for the department, is with us, and he probably can provide specific information regarding this question.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Mayor Pro Tem, Randy Scott with the Parks and Recreation Department. Since 1998, the Parks and Recreation Department and the parkland that we have acquired since 1998 is 80% of the land has been acquired in the Eastern Crescent.
Thank you. And I will let you two decide who should answer this question. Can you tell me in what way, if any, this proposed item 20 is in the best interest of the Parks Department and how this would benefit our parks?
Well, so Director McNeeley, when the concerns came to the department, she felt that the communication level with the development and real estate community was not up to our usual expectations. And with that in mind, she suggested an extension of the fees for a few months for projects that were already in the formal review process. We do recognize that we work closely with the development community as we coordinate for parkland and open space related to these projects, and we strive to build strong relationships.
So can you, I really want to understand, is item 20 in the best interest of the parks? Freezing the fees, reopening this Pandora's box, how is this in the interest of parks at all?
It is not.
Thank you. Would this action make it more difficult for the department to acquire parkland?
Yes, it would. Changes that decouple the parkland acquisition values from the fee schedule, they reduce the funding to acquire parkland in high growth areas, which is where the fees are being collected.
Thank you. What would the department say is the benefit of parks and parkland acquisition, and why is this a service we provide as a city?
Well, the benefits of the parks are many and in many different levels. I always go back to environmental, economic, and community. We tend to focus, actually as a department, we focus on all three of them, but obviously the community benefits for wellness, for activity for the kids and everything else are always high on our mind. But I would also say that City Council has established goals for the department, and we have key performance indicators that residents should be within walking distance of a park, and that the city should maintain a consistent amount of parkland per capita. And these goals, if we don't have the funding, we'll not be able to meet those. And the parkland dedication serves as the best tool to create a complete community.
Thank you, and we have a strategic direction priority of access to parks and trails for all our community as well. I just want to remind folks as we're talking about the value of parks and understanding the choices before us. And then lastly, despite the fact that many of these groups were involved in writing the formula in 2015 and 2016, and despite the fact that the city manager's budget proposal was noticed and publicly available, and the changes in fees were marked in red and whatnot, we've heard that many projects claim that they were taken by surprise and were not prepared to pay those fees. Can you detail for us the work that PARD has done to help accommodate projects in the pipeline and where things stand with that? And that may be a question for Randy. We can't hear you if you're speaking. Or does Leon?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
The Parks and Recreation Department consistently informs developers during the development review process that fees would be changing in October 1st. They've changed every year since 2016 through the same process. Was not a surprise. It was a larger jump this year than in years past, but that information was relayed. And since it was a larger jump from years past, if site plans were submitted prior to October 1st in 2021, we are administering those site plans with the 2021 fee schedule rather than the 2022 fee schedule.
Thank you.
There's about 100 in process currently.
Thank you. I will let somebody else who wants to talk. Looks like Councilmember Tiller has it.
Other people to talk? Pio, Councilmember Renteria.
Yes, there was a response this morning about the affordability housing. How would this fee increase affect tax credit houses that are being built where there's a majority of the apartments are 60% and under, and then they have a few market rates so that they can use to maintain the property? How would that affect that, the fee increase?
Mayor, I could answer that question.
Please, go ahead.
This is Rosie Truelove with the Housing and Planning Department. That is one of the aspects that we would hope to explore with the affordability impact analysis. As you heard from Megan Lash earlier today, the fees for the non-affordable units that come forward with tax credit type developments do have to pay parkland dedication, and for her particular development, she talked about a significant increase that the property would have to absorb. So that's one bit of evidence from a developer, and that's part of the analysis that we would do to get a better understanding of, so council could understand that and have that data in front of them with an affordability impact statement. And
that's one of the reasons why I feel like we need to postpone this, because I'm very concerned with the great need for affordable housing, and a lot of these tax credits and nonprofits that are going that route where they are building them for market rate are using that money, and they need that money to maintain the property. As we've seen in the past, that some of these apartment complex, especially tax credit, get into trouble, and they don't have the maintenance money to fix it up. and then you have a lot of tenants that are very upset. So I'm very concerned about this increase, especially on our tax credit developers.
Okay, Councilor Kelly.
Thank you. I have several questions here, and thank you, Councilmember Renteria, for bringing up about the affordability part. I'm wondering if one of you might be able to explain to me why the affordability impact statement and analysis is important to have and is included as part of the process. I also, kind of as a follow-up to that, was an affordability impact analysis done when the parkland dedication ordinance was written in 2016?
We did do an affordability impact statement analysis when the new methodology was created, and we did indicate that there will be a negative impact to affordability. We would like the opportunity to refresh that analysis in light of this most recent increase, given changing market conditions that have happened since this was initially proposed back in 2016.
So to clarify what you just said, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. The proposed ordinance today that we would be voting on is to help with the impact on affordability that would be had?
So this item, should it pass, would allow staff the opportunity to go through a revised affordability impact analysis to look at how this affects properties and developments that are happening now, so that we would have a better set of data to use as part of the decision-making process for council.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question is, I understand the increased fees were in the draft fee schedule in July, but did the city communicate to all the stakeholders that the fees would substantially increase the way the city regularly and as standard practice communicates to the community when there's a change in fees or costs? I know we may have touched on that briefly earlier. I just want to make sure.
I know that, council member, this is Rodney Gonzales, Assistant City Manager. I know that Director McNeeley is not here, but we did confirm with her that that communication was not done.
So that communication was not done in this case?
You're right.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, how would you estimate that you would take, how much would you estimate that you would take in from parkland dedication fees from this fiscal year if the ordinance were to pass? I don't know who would answer that. Sorry.
Hang on a second.
Yes, that depends on the number of permits that will be submitted and processed during this year. So this is still a variable. But if we judge from the previous year, the estimate is close to about 15 million.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm really coming from a perspective of seeking a fair process for everyone involved, including our stakeholders. It seems like through this ordinance, the Parks Department and staff is admitting the process was somewhat unfair to our stakeholders, but the ordinance would rectify a lack of shareholder process and ensure clarity in future calculations. Is that correct?
There are two issues there. One is whether an extension can be granted in order to address some of the communication that might not have gone out proactively to all of the stakeholders. However, the next part regarding the calculations, it is something that we would be getting direction from council. We are following the process that has been established in the ordinance that was passed by council in 2016.
Okay, thank you. Just two more follow-up questions. During the 6-month process outlined in the proposed ordinance, is your focus on reworking the entire ordinance or just clarifying or improving the way you calculate the fee per unit every year?
We are waiting for a direction from council.
Okay, and then
if
one
I
last
could-
question. Oh, go ahead, Rodney.
Sure, if I could, council member, and I'm reading from the ordinance itself. This is not intended to open the ordinance. You can see clearly part 2 says that a benchmark study of fees would be looked at by other cities. A review of other cities' processes related to parkland dedication fees would be done. And as Rosie has mentioned, an affordability impact study would be done. Within the parkland ordinance itself, there are some administrative processes that are relegated to the director. And there are those processes. For instance, like right now, there's a 5-year look back that is an administrative feature relegated to the director. We anticipate, and this whole process would be led by PARD, we anticipate that Director McNeeley and her team would have the opportunity to look at how they administer this and get feedback both internally from our folks at Housing and Planning, externally from our Parks Recreation folks, from our parks advocates, from the development community, and look through that lens of multiple areas, if you will. But in no circumstance, open up the ordinance. The other piece of this is that the fee that was in place as of September 30th would continue to be assessed. So this does not stop the collection of the parkland dedication.
So would it be fair to say that some of the fear of opening up this ordinance to further interpretation is not what the intention of the ordinance is?
Absolutely. This has nothing to do with the ordinance itself. As you can see, these are more of the administrative processes that are under the director's purview.
Thank you for that clarity. I just have one more question and then I'll pass it along. Is there any sort of limit to how we spend the parkland dedication, like any time limit or anything like that? And if so, what is the parkland dedication money specifically used for? Just so that the public knows. I know we got a lot of questions about that in my office.
I'll defer to Assistant Director Leon.
The parkland dedication fee in lieu of funding is used to acquire new parkland and to develop new parks or new park amenities in existing parks.
And then was there any time limit on how we spend that money or how many years we could have until we can spend it?
Yes, there is a timeframe where the developer can ask for a refund of 5 years of parkland dedication fees need to be spent.
And do we generally have to return any of that money currently?
No.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, Councilmember Ellis, then Councilmember Tovo.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually appreciate Councilmember Kelly's last question because I think the time limit is 5 years and it's only been in place for 5 years maybe. So I wonder how that's going to play out.
5 years has been in place since 1985.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So I have put up a post on the message board asking for a postponement, which I appreciate Councilmember Renteria also thinking along those same lines. And I want to daylight my thinking a little better. In my post, I asked for a 2-week postponement. I did see the mayor had responded with maybe it would be more helpful for us to take this up at the work session on November 30th in preparation for the December 2nd meeting. But a lot of my line of thinking comes from this particular process for assessing parkland dedication fees. It took 2 years to develop, and so I've been trying to unpack that in 2 weeks to understand all of the implications. And obviously, I and a lot of my fellow colleagues are big supporters of our park system, also care about how much money it costs to build housing. So this is a really difficult conversation to unpack all the angles from. I also appreciate Councilmember Alter's line of thinking in that it does seem like a false dichotomy here because there's a lot of different fees that go into the cost of building housing. And I, for one, would just like more time to run through this. We didn't have the opportunity for a work session to discuss this too. So I really think it would be a good due process for us to take a little more time and look at this more comprehensively and to try to sort through all of the different angles. We certainly don't want to detract from parkland acquisition or anything that would further inhibit our ability to acquire green spaces for the public. But I also care very much about not making building housing more expensive than it needs to be, especially in a city with a housing crisis. And I know my voting record is very strong on both of those. So I don't have any questions to daylight today, but I did just want to daylight for my colleagues that I would like to ask for that postponement at the appropriate time.
Councilmember Tovo?
Thanks. I had some follow-up questions about a variety of things. Let me start with some of the information, Randy Scott, that you provided. So I want to be sure I heard you correctly, that since the ordinance passed in 2016, the fees have been updated annually through the budget process. Was that correct? Was that accurate based on what you said?
Yes, council member, that's correct.
So when council passed the ordinance, it set in place a process. We've used exactly that formula year after year after year. It's resulted in an increase year after year after year. And that's what's happened until this year. And at any point during any of those years, did you proactively reach out and I'm not even sure who you would let know, that these fees were increasing?
Well, we have regular meetings with the development community where we do inform them of the fee process and the development community is well aware that this is in the fee schedule that council adopts on an annual basis.
So did you do anything differently this year than you had done in any previous year?
No, we did nothing different. This is the same process that we've run through every year since 2016.
So I think that's one of the places where I'm struggling. We have a formula. I was on the dais when it passed. It was the product of lots of significant stakeholder work and compromises, and frankly, it got walked back a bit from where it was when it was on its way to us. And part of that was because of concerns that we were hearing from the development community about affordability. It's been in place. The formula has meant that the fees have increased year after year because, as Councilmember Alter said, the alternative is to freeze those rates. And the point is that we want those fees to keep pace with the market value of land, because the whole intention is for it to be able to be used to buy land for parkland, to keep up with the growth that our city is experiencing, and making sure that no matter where you live in the city, you have access to parkland, and no matter what kind of housing you live in, you have access to parkland, because we believe that it's a benefit for health reasons, for all kinds of other reasons, to have that access to parkland. So the same process was followed this year as in any other year. This was a proposal the manager brought us. We approved it. So I really want to be careful about the way in which we talk about this. I am concerned about assertions that maybe the Parks Department didn't do what they are required to do, or didn't handled it differently this year, because none of that appears to be the case. You handled it appropriately. You handled it just the way we always do. Frankly, the budget has various ways in which our fees change, and we handle all of that with a notification process that goes out to all members of the public at the same time. And to suggest that particular groups need to get particular kinds of notification is a terrible, would be a terrible precedent, in my opinion. Having said that, I also understand, Mr. Scott, from what you said, that, and let me just also say, there was a year where we decided and set a new policy that out-of-city residents were going to pay different rates for youth programs, for after-school programs, for summer camps. We did not notify every participant, every family who had ever participated in that program, to let them know that was going to be a shift. I mean, again, like if we started to notify every potentially impacted individual about changes that were reflected in the budget, we would spend a significant amount more sending out notifications than we do currently, and I think it's completely infeasible to expect that. And again, it's particularly concerning to me that there are assertions in the community that the Parks Department handled this differently or inappropriately. So having said that, I also understand, Mr. Scott, that the park staff have worked closely with developers, and that, did I hear you say 100 projects are being filed their site plans before October 20th, and so those will be proceeding this next year using last year's parkland fee rates. Is
That's correct.
that right?
Yes, Councilmember. Leading up to what would have been the usual deadline of the 2021 fees, we processed somewhere around 50 applications to allow them to be under, the 2001 or 2021 fee in lieu of. We also have about 100 that are also still in the process that were submitted between October 1st of 2020 and October 1st of 2021 that will be also administered the 2021 fee in lieu of, that have not been approved yet.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Do you have any, we have a couple different ways of paying for parkland. One would be to use the Parkland Fee Dedication Fund, which has helped us successfully acquire lots of acreage, and I appreciate the questions of my colleagues about that earlier. The other is through bonds. Has the Parks Department done any kind of analysis of how those two interplay and have interplayed in recent years in terms of power of bond dollars when we can leverage them against parkland dedication fees?
Yes, Councilman, we have. And we do it on an annual basis. And there's two main ways that we acquire parkland. We either acquire parkland through bond funding or we acquire parkland through parkland dedication. And the fees in lieu of parkland dedication, we utilize to buy parkland. And we try to marry those with bond dollars to extend the bond life. The bond dollars, what we would call, are paid for by existing residents. So if you live in Austin and you voted for the 2018 bond, you approved $45 million for parkland acquisition. And that's being paid for by the existing residents. And the PLD dollars are dollars that come from people moving here that are impacting our system and the reason the system needs to grow. So fiscal year, for example, fiscal year 2020, for every dollar of bond that we spent, we matched that with 24 cents in PLD dollars. So basically that boils it down to 76% of the growth is paid for by existing residents. And the other remaining percent is paid for by the residents moving here. And FY 2021, for every dollar of bond that we spent, the existing residents, we matched it with 34 cents of PLD. So a track downward, we increased our PLD expenditure in 2021, enabling us to rely only 66% of the existing residents for the 2018 bond package.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I had heard that, but couldn't have articulated it. So thank you very much. I mean, because to me that is, one of the key reasons that we passed a parkland dedication policy, so that we're making sure that as we're welcoming new residents, that we are also not putting too much burden on our existing residents to pay for those new services and amenities that are serving those residents. I have some additional questions. They're primarily for the city manager, so I will halt this for the moment, but thank you very much, Mr. Scott.
Councilmember Fuentes, then Councilmember Kitchen.
Thank you. Colleagues, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge who these stakeholders are that we're talking about. We're talking about developers and the extent to which developers have an influence over how we operate and do city business. It is extremely troubling to me to learn that we had an open and public and transparent process that had developers at the table. They were part of the negotiations in coming up with the formula. And we have for the last few years been growing our park system. All of a sudden, they've decided that they have an issue with this formula, that they have an issue with the fees, and they want to freeze the fees. And to me, it shows to the extent at which they're influencing how we do policy. And I fundamentally believe that I was not elected for developers. I was elected to represent the people of my district. City staff just shared that 80% of the parkland acquisition fees, parkland dedication fees, have gone towards parks in the Eastern Crescent. Communities like mine in District 2 have benefited from parkland dedication. We have, my District 2 community is a marginalized community that has suffered and been affected by decades of institutional neglect. So it's policies like this one, the Parkland Dedication Ordinance, that help us ensure that we're being equitable in the way that we do parks, in the way that we do green space, in the way that we follow through on our commitment to take on climate crisis that we're in. Just a few weeks ago, we adopted the Climate Equity Plan. And we know that we have to ensure that as we strengthen our resilience as a community, ensuring that we have an environment that is equitable to everyone that lives in Austin is part of that. So we have a choice of either do we go out, we have a choice of do we go out for more bonds and put the burden on the taxpayers and the existing Austinites, or do we let new development pay for itself? And so it's extremely troubling for me to be here and listening to this conversation, to know that the process in which this came about is just beyond, especially knowing that the notifications for youth programs didn't go out. But this process, which was done in an open way, we have a budget process that is posted and available to all of our community, available for the developers to keep track of and to participate in. And somehow they missed the fee increase. And so now here we are having this conversation. It would be one thing if this policy change or consideration was brought forward by the people of Austin, but it wasn't. It was brought forward by developers. And so I think it's very clear that we're talking about that and that we're not going into this false narrative of having to choose between affordable housing or our parks. Individuals who live in low-income communities deserve just as much access to our parks as anyone else. And so that's kind of the lens that I'm viewing this, this policy proposal that's before us. And that's all I have to say at this time.
Councilmember Kitchen.
I cannot support this item. I think we should deny it. I think that I share the sentiments that have been expressed, and thank you, Councilmember Fuentes. That's exactly how I'm feeling about this. It feels like an end run around the process, a very established stakeholder process that went through a lot of analysis and a lot of discussion to come up with a formula that is, based on land values and is designed to give us funds that we need in a fair way based on land prices. And as they're going up, the fees are going to go up, and they need to go up in order to be able to pay for parks. So bringing this to council without going through a process is an end run around the process that was used previously to actually talk through and grapple with these issues. Particularly since we're, a month or two after passing the budget this year? So now we're being asked to revisit what we already passed in the budget, and we're being asked to revisit a formula. And with all due respect, Rodney, I'm not sure how this doesn't impact the ordinance. I mean, that's where the formula is that came up with these fees. So I'm not quite sure that I understand what you're saying. This is not the appropriate process. We've already addressed the myriad of policy issues that have to be addressed as part of this. I feel like, once again, bringing up the argument that we're pitting parks against affordable housing is a false choice. It's not worthy of this conversation. We've had that conversation before. We've come up with a balance, and that's what we have existing. The existing ordinance was a well-thought-out, stakeholder-approved, discussed over several years balance. And to suggest now that stakeholders didn't know this makes no sense, particularly in light of the fact that the process that these stakeholders would like us to follow is an end run around process by just bringing this forward to us without any public input, public discussion, or a briefing. So I cannot support this, and I hope we get the chance to deny it.
Just a second, let me go first if I can, because you got a chance to go, so go, and then I'll come to you. All right, this is a really hard item, the way it's being presented to us. And Rodney, you need to know that I am really disappointed in staff that it would tee up this item in this way on our agenda. I don't think anybody on this agenda wants to make a forced choice between parks and affordable housing. But the way this has been teed up and set up, it's inescapable that that's the choice that we're making, whether we vote yes or whether we vote no. Certainly in terms of how it will be perceived and discussed in the community. And I just think that it wasn't prepared well, it wasn't discussed with council well, it wasn't targeted, and it's broad, and that puts us in a really awkward and difficult place on the dais, which is why I'm going to support Council Member Ellis's motion to postpone this, so as to give time to staff and to the stakeholders and to the Parks Department to try to figure out how to get on the same page and to tee up a question that we can all understand. As I read the ordinance that is in front of us, you read from Section 2, which certainly speaks about fees. Section 3 talks about an engagement process. We know how to limit that engagement process just to one on fees, because we showed we knew how to do that in number 2, but we didn't do it in number 3. Number 3 just speaks to an engagement process, so it begs the question, on what? I look at Section 4. Section 4 is the part of the ordinance that has staff coming back, and it says fees and the ordinance. There's no limitation in this resolution or ordinance, whichever it is. There's no limitation to just fees. There's no narrowly drawn. If we pass this, my fear is that we'll do exactly what Councilmember Alter was talking about, is we'll be opening up Pandora's box. We won't know what we're talking about other than, hey, let's take another look at the Parkland dedication fee. So it presents what I believe is a false choice between affordability versus parks because of the way that it's been teed up. It's overly broad, I think, and would arguably open up Pandora's box. We need parks in this city, and we have a huge affordability issue in this city. Frankly, I think the affordability issue is existential. I think we're losing people right now in our city because of affordability. Parks is key and central to the quality of life in our city. I don't know that we're losing any people because of parks, but I do know that it is fundamental to the kind of quality of life that we want to live in this city. And I don't know why it is that we're trying to drive affordability just by looking at the parks ordinance. I mean, there are 100 ordinances. I wish what we were doing, and quite frankly, the cost that developers have to pay, that an owner has to pay, that anyone has to pay to develop property in this city seems to me to be out of kilter with every other city that we look at. I mean, I'm in so many conversations with people around the country about how long it takes and how much it costs to develop property in this city. And I don't know why we're out of line. And it's a conversation that the city's been having for a long time, and I know for at least the last 7 years that I've been sitting on this dais. And we don't seem, we made some progress, and you've made some progress in that department, but relative to where it is that we need to get to, it just doesn't seem to be happening. I don't know why we're not considering an IFC or something coming from staff that says, that says we're going to figure out what it takes to actually have homes that cost $200,000 and $250,000 able to be built in this city so that we can increase supply. That would be a really helpful, useful thing. I don't know whether that would touch on the park ordinance or not. Maybe it would. Maybe it would touch on 100 different ordinances. Maybe it would touch on how we do things. You know, what do we have to do to be able to approve housing units in this city for $375,000 and below? Because right now, the absence of workforce housing means that any less expensive housing we might otherwise have is getting bid up to a price where people at the lower end can't afford to buy it. It doesn't exist. I don't know whether we should be looking at things like, let's let third parties, independent parties, certify compliance with code rather than having code people do it. I mean, there are cities that do that right now. Developers can go out and they can hire third-party engineers that are putting their credentials on the line in order to be able to do things. And that way, maybe that would be more significant for the cost that developers pay, maybe more significant than on the cost of the product, maybe more significant on the supply of housing in this city. I don't know how to choose between affordable housing and parks when those are the two things that are put against each other. But give me a third choice. Affordable housing. Do you want affordable housing? Do you want more parkland? Or are you willing to deal with the risk associated with having third-party independent people do inspections for fear that somebody's going to game the system or do something wrong? I mean, if those are my choices, I pick affordability in parks and I will deal with the risk. And I say that without knowing what the risk really is. But we haven't looked at that. But yet the resolution that comes before us is something that is not targeted. It doesn't speak to that. It pits those two things against each other. Now, I don't know the issue on bad information or misinformation. Obviously, there's a contradiction between what you just said and what the parks employee said, you know, about what happened or didn't happen. I do know that it was listed in the fee schedule on page 794. I mean, you can find what it is. You can look at it and see that it's an increase from one year to the next year. But I don't know if we call those out, and I don't know what we do. I would suggest, manager, that going in the future, learning from this incident, we publish a table of every fee in the city during budget season that's going up more than 10%. And we just list them all, so that people know what's happening to fees in the city, and we're really transparent about what we're doing with those. But I don't know whether there was, I know it was published. I know that back when we did this deal in 2015, the development community specifically asked that fees don't get increased. This parkland dedication fee doesn't get increased on its own, requires council action. It can come with a recommendation, has to be posted in public, and that's what happened. I don't know about the other meetings or the contradiction, but regardless, in my role on this dais, I can't be concerned really about that. It's really what is the right policy for the city. I am troubled at the prospect of just opening up the entire parks ordinance. I would like someone to actually sit and think about what it is that if we're looking at fees, then I want to know what it is that we think the fee problem is. I mean, do we think that the formula is a bad formula? Or do we think that the data going into the formula is bad data? Or that it's being misapplied? I mean, those are questions. So that had me then looking at the formula. Now, the intent of the formula, we've all agreed, is to make sure that we pay more for parkland, or that we recognize that the value of parkland is going up. And we're in a market that's going up. And as land goes up, the price of land goes up, what we pay for parkland should go up corresponding to that. The policy that we collectively have driven on this dais is that we want there to be a relationship between the value of real estate and its increase and what we pay for parks. The only thing I know for sure is that that is not what this formula does. It does not do that. What this formula is it doesn't estate. It looks at the value of what PARDS has paid for parkland. And there is a difference between those two things. What we pay for parkland should be driven by the value increase in what the land prices have increased, not the other way around. Or not something that just becomes self-reinforcing. If we're paying more for parkland, we should pay even more for parkland because we're paying more for parkland. But that's what this does. This chart, and I appreciate my colleagues, multiple colleagues asking for this chart, this Excel spreadsheet in the Q&A so we could actually see what the chart shows. And the chart shows, it takes a look at all of the purchases that we made. Purchases we made, not sales that took place in the marketplace, our purchases of things that we purchased. And it tells us what the average was in any given year. And then we look at it for 5 years to come up with a 5-year average, which is supposed to smooth that out. But when you look at this formula, there are at least 3 things that are fundamentally wrong with this formula to drive the policy goal that we set as members of this dais. The first one is that it doesn't measure the increases in market value. It only looks at what the increase is that PARD is paying for land. And I don't know whether those 2 things are related to each other or not, because there's nothing in this chart that talks about the market value for land. I'd point out to you that last year, the average, with a weighted average price per acre on this chart for the 8 sales in 2020 was $235,822 an acre, and the year before it was $50,165. Now, prices of dirt have gone up in this city, but they have not gone up by that ratio. They haven't. It's gone up a lot, but it has not gone up by that ratio. Even though that's a year-to-year increase of almost 400%. It's almost 5 times higher in a year. Again, our prices are going up, but they're not going up like that. And we don't have a formula that can catch that. The second problem with this formula that we have is that to indicate value, when you're actually trying to look at value, when you're trying to make any kind of conclusion, you want to have more than just a few data points. You want to have enough data points so that you can actually see trends. If you only have 10 data points or 2 data points, you could be looking at outliers you wouldn't know because you're looking at a few data points. In our last 5 years looking at this, looking at all of the sales that we used, again, not market value sales, park sale sales. 1 year, there were no sales. 1 year, there was only 1 sale. And in 2 of the years, there were only 2 sales. I would suggest there's insufficient data for us to be able to draw a conclusion about what the value of real estate is or how the value of real estate is changing from 1 year to the next. I'll give you a third problem with the formula. And I apologize because I didn't actually get to look at the formula until just a little while ago. So I'm not trying to limit myself just to 3 problems with this formula. But the third problem with this formula is that it uses the price of an apple and the price of an orange to suggest the value of a banana. And by that I mean that if you have the sale price of a really small piece of property, 1/4 acre, 1/10 of an acre, that sales price per square foot, which obviously translates into a huge per acre price, is generally speaking going to be significantly greater than the value of a 25-acre tract. So in the world of real estate valuation, when you're trying to value things, you don't use a tiny tract to value a big tract. But yet, in our formula, we throw in big sales and little sales, and we throw them in as a weighted average. We mix them up. I point out that last year's group of sales, which had the average value of $235,822, half of the few sales we had were over an acre and half of them were under an acre. The value of the sales over an acre was $159,000 an acre. The value of the ones under 1 acre was $1,364,000. And our formula kind of mushes them all together and then comes up with a number which has nothing to do with the market value of land, which is what we said as a policy we wanted to key off of. That's the problem that we have here. We have a random and arbitrary number that is acting like a random and arbitrary number. So I look at that and I say, this is not the policy that we intended to do. This formula does not do that policy. But the resolution that you have brought is not the resolution to fix or look at that problem. Because the one that you've brought, I think, for fear, is going to put us back to re-trading or re-dealing with what was a difficult conversation 5 years ago. And now it's back to us. I mean, I hope you're not going to bring this back to every council every 4 or 5 years to redo the parkland dedication discussion. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't want to vote no on this. I don't want to vote no because there's a problem here. I don't want to vote yes on this because yes doesn't do what I want either. So I'm going to, when you move to postpone this for 30 days to try and figure out what it is that we do to not retrade the policy, but to actually be true to the policy that we intended to have, 30 days, I think you just need to figure it out and then come back to us and say, okay, this is a better way for us to deal with the challenge that's presented at this point. Let's keep the fee that we approved in place over the next 30 days. Let's just postpone this thing. People will wait for 30 days to see what we're looking at. But this formula doesn't work, and this resolution does not work. Councilmember Renteria.
Thank you, Mayor, and I agree with you. When this came before, we lobbied the state to give us permission. We actually went down there with the intention of using that money for affordable housing. And that's what happened, and the state said, no, we're gonna give it to you for park dedication, because they didn't give a damn about low-income people in Austin, Texas. And for people to be saying that this is a developer, well, you know what? Developers do build affordable housing. They're labeled on that. We had Greg Anderson that got kicked off the Planning Commission because he worked for Habitat, and he was a developer. And that's really frustrating for me because over the years, we have seen what money could have been used to build our affordable housing, and we never got the opportunity because the state said no. But they're willing to go ahead and give us this money so that we can build and buy parkland. And, well, too bad about the poor people. They're just going to have to move out of Austin. They can come over here and visit us in our beautiful parkland, but they're not going to be able to live here.
Councilmember Fuentes, then Councilmember Alter.
Thank you, Mayor, and I agree with your sentiments about wanting to take a broader look, especially at the policy and to make sure that we're actually creating policy that solves the problem. And I'm with you on that. And I do think that deserves a conversation. I don't think that is something that staff could work on within 30 days. I think that'll be, we'll need more time to prepare for that. And I don't think that what's before us today is the vehicle to have that conversation. So I would like to make a substitute motion to postpone indefinitely this item.
Okay. I can't let you do that any more than I can let Councilmember Ellis make her motion after she spoke either, because you can't make a walking motion. And since you talked first in debate, you can't do that at this point. But we can come back to do that, and we will consider what are the vehicles to be able to not make a decision today. But by way of clarification, I didn't want staff to come back in 30 days with either the exact motion because that's not going to work. Nor do I want them to come back with an answer, but I would like them to come back with something that says, okay, this is how we think we should approach this challenge. That's what I would like, and I'd like them to come back and do that so that we're just not leaving it open. But to your point, for exactly all the reasons that you said that. Councilmember Alter.
I would like to move to postpone this item indefinitely.
There's a motion to postpone indefinitely. Is there a second to that item? Councilmember Fuentes seconds it. Discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely.
May I speak to my motion?
Yes, you can.
So Mayor, you said a lot in there, but I think what it revealed is that this item is not the vehicle to solve a problem that we might want to solve. I don't believe that coming to us after we unanimously voted on the item, opening up the Pandora's box with no statement of the problem, no statement of the history, et cetera, really addresses that. I think that a better procedural process would be for several council members to come forward with an IFC that provides the direction. It is not sufficient in my mind for you to say to Rodney, come back in 30 days with a solution to affordability and fees and a path for that. I think that is something that by tradition, we usually provide some policy guidance. Now we'll have an opportunity in our strategic planning session next week to talk about some of the ways that we want to balance certain pieces and elements of our priorities, of which access to parkland and access to housing are both high in our priorities for SD 23. So I think that postponing indefinitely is more appropriate. I'm very uncomfortable with how this came to us, how a real estate group was able to get something on the agenda that no council member asked them for without having to go through a process of getting council to bring it forward. And if there were 4 council members or 5 that want to bring something together and work on some solutions that provide real direction, that's fine. I do also want to comment a little bit on some of the things that you said. The cost of land in Austin, the market value is way higher than the cost of parkland. The thing about parkland is we have often had to satisfy with floodplains and things, and so you often see some of these lower level parks and in terms of value. And so $255,000 is way lower than what we've been paying per acre for our housing, for example, which has been closer to $900,000 an acre. And I know because I have this calculation somewhere in different things. So yes, we could be focusing this on the market value of land, but it would be much higher than parkland. And the reason that we use the price per acre of parkland that we've purchased is precisely to make it so it's not as high as the land, because that was a compromise that needed to happen in order to get anything. We also have to, in order to assess an impact fee, it has to be related to the thing that we're trying to fund. So I don't know that we have the opportunity by law, if we want to assess a parkland dedication fee, to tie it to land in general. It has to be related to the what it costs us to purchase parkland. So there are all of those aspects also. It is complicated, which is why I said it's a Pandora's box. I want to be clear, this doesn't mean that there's no possible way that this process gets improved, or that if we find that suddenly the formula is just not working, that we can't relook at it and take a look at it. This vehicle, though, is not the way to do that. Having only the real estate sector at the table when a choice is moving forward doesn't get us to the consensus, doesn't help us to figure out the opportunity that we have so that we don't have to make that false choice, which I think we all share a goal of not wanting to have to make. So I believe that if we postpone indefinitely, that leaves open the opportunity for folks to work on things, for people to put their thinking caps on. And again, I want to go back to something I said in the beginning. I don't know why we're singling out parkland as the thing that's the choice here. We have street impact fees. You can look, and I think it's in the backup. They put what they did for the street impact fees. I mean, you can do this analysis that's called in here, but one of the things we know that we're going to have the highest parkland dedication fees in Texas. Okay, but I'm not really comparing myself to the other Texas cities on this particular issue. We know that they're going to find that it affects affordability because by definition, if you increase the fee on a development, you're decreasing affordability by their definition of way that they're looking at it. So like, there's a lot of problems with the way this is set up. And we perhaps through this process are identifying something that we need to pay closer attention to and that we have an opportunity to think differently about so that we can come up with ways that there are win-wins. Something that I would really like to see is we need to find a way so that we have commercial projects contributing to our parkland dedication, even if it's just that they have to give us a trail easement when we need it. That is something that's positive. This is structured as a lose for parks with no possibility in the way that it is framed that we can win. And that is not going to get us to move forward in a way that our community is going to trust.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, I don't think has had a chance to speak yet. Did you have your hand raised?
I did, thank you. I'm just having some trouble finding that mute button. I'm really, really appreciating this conversation. It's got me thinking about a lot of things, and I wanted to make sure to say that I appreciate so much of what our colleagues and you have said so far, especially that bit that you said about transparency. And it got me thinking as we were all, as we're deliberating and everybody's talking, it got me thinking that in a majority renter city, the majority of our constituents are renters. I think it's critical that we acknowledge that when you increase cost to build rental housing in Austin, that those costs, they get passed on to renters. So that's one point I want to make certain that we're being very clear and explicit about expressing. The fee increases that we're talking about here were due to the acquisition of high value land for parks in downtown last year. I frankly don't see how it's equitable to have a formula that leads to increased rents in District 1 based on the purchase of property for pocket parks in downtown. But the fact is that we don't have a complete picture of what the affordability impact of these fees will be. So I think that's not the case with other fees that we charge, much like, Councilmember Alter was pointing out with street impact fees and density bonus fees and drainage fees. As with any other process, that we work on in the city, I think it absolutely makes sense that we would engage with stakeholders. We have to engage with our stakeholders. They're directly impacted by the policies we make, and not doing so would negatively impact those who need the housing the most. But I would definitely be remiss to not point out that developers are people. When we have these conversations, I want us to make sure that we're careful. Words, intonation, context, tone, all of those things mean something when we're talking to our constituents. I would be remiss not to point out that developers are people who work in real estate, who work in development. You could very easily replace the word developer with home builder, and instantly the connotation changes. I think we have to point out that every single person who is housed in an apartment, a single family home, whether they are renter, whether they own their home, if you live someplace that somebody built, somebody had to build that. Every single business, small business, medium business, large businesses, every school, hospital, church, you get the point. Somebody has to build things, and we cannot lump everyone into that monocle sporting monopoly man twisting his mustache category. I think it's dangerous for us to do that. I think critical affordable housing partners like Habitat for Humanity and Foundation Communities, they provide critical housing that we desperately need in this town where we're critically short on housing. Those are developers. I want to thank you, Councilmember Renteria, for really making that point, because I just kept thinking, I want to make certain that as we continue to engage in this conversation, I am all too happy to support postponement. I think some of the points that were made here about this not being the vehicle, that we might have other options to deploy that are better, that, more thought needs to go into it, the process needs to be revisited. I agree and support all of that. I just also want to point out that I think we have to be very careful when we're having these conversations, that we don't that we don't other the people who build the things that we live in, sleep in, worship in, get our education in. I mean, we need people who build things. So we should definitely be careful about not miscategorizing all people who are in the industries where they build things that we need. Thank you for hearing my points, and thank you to all my colleagues for really, making very thoughtful commentary and points, because it does have me thinking critically about what it looks like to move forward. So I appreciate the conversation.
I'm going to recognize Rodney here for some clarifications. As I'm listening to people on the dais, it seems to me that there's a significant majority to postpone this by some vehicle. My suggestion is going to be we try and figure out what is the best vehicle to be able to do that, so we can get into the presentation that we have at the end. But Rodney,
Mayor, we have
hang on
a-
a second. I'm not stopping anybody from being able to talk. Rodney, do you want to give us you said you wanted to add some clarifications.
Thank you, Mayor. I did, and I appreciate all the conversation this evening and all the feedback that we were getting. Just to bring forward some clarification, the fee increase, whether or not the development community knew it or not and didn't see that particular page in the budget, is one thing. Internally, we didn't know. Internally, our staff did not know about this large fee increase, in particular our housing and planning staff. To add context to the fee increases in the past, we had 3 years of fee increases that ranged from 10 to 13%. The year before this budget was 1%. So when you look at that in that historical context, you think, okay, maybe it might be another 10%, albeit we know that prices continue to increase and skyrocket in Austin. This year was 124%. As we put together the budget, I believe the community at large, expects all of us to be transparent and for all of us to highlight those things that are most important and most impactful to everyone. This was not highlighted. This was on a single page with fees that were crossed out and new fees increased. I don't think that you expect us as staff to not be that transparent with our community, whether it's this particular fee or other items. I believe that you expect us to be honorable. I think that you expect us to be trustworthy, and I think you expect us to be as transparent as possible. I can tell you with certainty, because I had this conversation with Director McNeeley, there was no conversation with anyone about this fee increase. There were ample times to have those conversations. There were meetings post the budget proposal to have those conversations, and they weren't had. And that gives me pause about how you expect us as staff to operate within the community. I believe that we are all trust agents. The community has to trust us. These are their dollars that we're working with. And yes, these are parkland dedication fees, and they're so valuable. And we are not talking about rethinking the formula. We do not want to go there. We did not put the formula specifically in the ordinance. What we're talking about is giving council the opportunity that we don't believe that you had in the budget process to take everything into consideration at our most critical time of affordability crisis. Every day we read about affordability in Austin, the lack of it. Every day I know that you're contacted about renters being priced out. Every day we're seeing these home prices increase. And what we wanted to bring to council was this particular concern, that we think that you know that it is a concern in Austin, affordability. We don't intend to tee up affordability versus parks. That's why we did not say stop the fee collection. It's simply continue the fee schedule that was in effect September 30th, which brought $15 million last year in fee collections, which is great. Continue that fee schedule and allow us, with parks as the lead, working with housing and planning, working with all stakeholders, not just the development community, all stakeholders, to bring forward information so that way we could consider all of this in context. We wanted to bring light of day to this so that way we could have those conversations. This was not led by the development community. If anything, they flagged it for us that this was there. And I can tell you that I was really surprised when that happened because in working with our staff, and I worked with this council for 15 years.
We have a motion on the table.
Yeah, and Mayor, I had indicated early on
Hang
that
a
I had
second.
questions
I
for the
understand.
manager.
We're going to get to everybody. It's
I
not
don't think these are
frequently-
clarifications, with all due respect.
It sounds
I
like a
understand
defense
that.
to me.
Everybody else has had a chance to speak. I'm going to give the staff a chance to speak as well. Ronnie, you can finish.
Thank you. I'll sum up. I just wanted to add that additional context and that clarification to this piece of it, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Poole, Councilmember Ellis, then Councilmember Kelly.
So I would just say two things, that if the fee was not highlighted, then why did staff not highlight it during the budget? And I will also point out that rents and purchase prices on sales are what the market can bear. They rise and they fall based on what the market is, not always what the parkland dedication fee is. And the parkland dedication fee is minuscule in comparison to the costs, and we know this when we look at pro formas. With the actual costs of development, they're minor. But the impact of having a park near your apartment complex where you can walk to with your kiddos, that's major. And Mayor, I agree with you that we should not be pitting affordability against parkland. It's a tough challenge, but Austin can rise to tough challenges, and we just need to take it on.
Councilmember Ellis.
Thank you, Mayor. I will try to keep my comments brief because we are way past dinner time and we still have more work to do ahead of us. But I could be okay with an indefinite postponement just because we haven't really understood the process that we are trying to unfold together and what direction we would like to head together. What I would like, if this is appropriate direction, is that at our work session on November 30th, that we at least start unveiling what are the big questions we want to address. I've seen the city manager tackle this in a very streamlined way before to say, what do we want to see different, if anything? And some of that should, I think, include stakeholder outreach. It sounds like the Parks Department hasn't had to do outreach like this before. This might be something that is better suited for development services, who already has a program built to make sure that as these fees change, they know who to reach out to and how to address that situation. And I also just need to say, I worry that we are putting so many things on our Parks Director that are not just managing the park space. We had a lot of conversations around grounds maintenance, facilities maintenance, recreation centers, programming, trying to make sure that our Parks Department is enjoyable to everybody who loves them. And now we're asking her to do fee outreach to the development community and our home builders. We're asking them to work on other social services that are just not best tackled by the Parks Department. And I just really worry that we're putting so many things on the department that should not be in their wheelhouse when they are already underfunded, and we are always looking for ways to fund the Parks Department. So I would like to put a guardrail on coming back to us with what are our next steps. And this is not to say that any group shouldn't be working on an IFC. I just know how hard it is, that we would all probably write the IFC differently. And it may be hard to get partway down the road and then people are trying to make amendments, and we need this to be as streamlined as possible. So my recommendation would be to have a guardrail of what is the process moving forward and what, if any, changes would we like to see in the ordinance, the fees, and the process by which we adopt those fees.
Thank you. Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you. I would support a postponement, but I would feel more comfortable if there was a timeline on that. Having an indefinite postponement does not necessarily correct the matter at hand here today, and so I would like to have it tied down a little bit more before I can support the motion. Thanks.
Okay, I would also support a postpone indefinitely. The more I think about it, a postpone indefinitely is a motion that a body adopts when it doesn't want to vote on what is presented in front of them. I don't want to vote on this presented in front of us. So I'm comfortable with a motion to postpone indefinitely. I will join with you and however many other colleagues we have to ask the manager to put on our work session on the 30th a discussion of this issue. But I wanted to not only look at, I mean, I'm not trying to open up everything, but there's an issue here with respect to what this fee is measuring in terms of the policy that we spent, but to take a look at how it is we deal actively as a city with affordability. What is our game plan to deal with affordability with more tools than just the parkland ordinance? Not to have the answers, but to lay out for us. That is our next existential challenge. I mean, we, as a body, we dug deep and we really hit transportation over the years. We dug deep and we hit affordable housing, subsidized affordable housing. We have hit homelessness. We really need to figure out how to do affordability. But any two of us can ask for that, so we can just ask the manager to come back, and I know there's more than two of us. I think Councilmember Fuentes said the same thing. So I'm going to support the motion to postpone indefinitely. I'm going to ask staff to come back on the 30th and try to present us with some kind of roadmap to consider to go forward. And that is not to the exclusion of any council member bringing anything any council member wants to bring. Councilmember Tovo.
Yeah, I hate to take us backwards, but I had some questions I really need to better understand. And as I signaled earlier, I had some questions for our city manager. City manager, can you help me understand? I see in the Q&A in answer to the question about the stakeholders who participated in meetings since the passage of these fees, the stakeholders who were met with were RICA, and these were meetings that the Parks and Recreation Department attended with the city manager's office. I guess, as I reflected back over this last week or so, reflected back over past policy decisions, I could not remember an instance where the city manager came forward with what is really a policy matter and put it on the council agenda. I certainly know that we've had several striking examples of policy decisions that some of us have spoken up about in recent weeks, or recent months, including the decision to allow camping on along Cesar Chavez in areas of parkland, including your decision to allow camping at City Hall in spite of a building policy that prohibited overnight stays. So you certainly have made policy decisions absent council action in recent months. But this is the only example I could think of where there was an actual item on our council agenda that is really reversing a policy decision of the council. And so I need to understand whether you were moving forward with any kind of precedent in mind. Another example that was close was Arizona, when the council had passed a ban on travel to Arizona, and we had a council conversation about it at work session and provided you with a direction with information and data that could be lifted. But I just could not think of an example where, absent council direction, the manager had put an item on our council agenda. So could you address, there may be examples I'm not thinking of, and I would appreciate knowing what those are.
Thank you, Councilmember. And certainly these are critical policy items for the body to consider, and that's why it was so important to have this discussion. And I look back to even the conversation around the Land Development Code, and we framed that in a different way at that point in time to make sure that we had appropriate direction from the council in that regard. This is only teeing up the discussion for you to have, to say ensuring that we have the appropriate level of engagement, that we know that we need to hear from various stakeholders, and because the fees have increased so dramatically, that this is critical for the council to take into consideration both the affordability impact regarding this particular ordinance. So it's just allowing the time for that discussion to happen. And that's the reason why we put it on the agenda for today.
Okay, I would draw a distinction between the conversation about the LDC, because again, that happened in a work session involving the council. We provided you with direction, and then the staff went forward, did their work before something appeared on our agenda to schedule for the manager. Anyway, we have more time to talk about it, but I would appreciate any example, because I think it is without precedent, at least recent precedent, for an item to appear on our agenda that reverses course on a policy issue without council direction. And I cannot wrap my head around where in the city charter you derive that authority. So I would appreciate any additional information you could provide. I'm super concerned about some of the conversation that transpired here today around internal staff not being aware of what was in the budget that was brought forward by you to this council dais for action. You know, it is all of our job to know what is in the budget, all of us who are involved in it. And it is a budget that is approved, it is presented, it is the city manager's budget. And so, I mean, I heard what you're saying and I understand what you're saying, ACM Gonzales, but it concerns me when you say internal staff were not aware of an element that was in the budget. So, anyway, thank you. I'm ready to
Thank you.
vote.
Colleagues, there's a motion to postpone indefinitely in front of us. Let's keep the debate on that issue. Councilmember Alter.
Thank you. I want to apologize for interjecting before. I share Councilmember Tovo's concern, and I really didn't know how to react to that. The notion that we appreciate your honesty, but I find it very, very concerning that our staff were not aware of an increase of a fee, you know, in the budget. I certainly noticed it. It was in red, you know, whatever. So I do need to just acknowledge that, and I apologize for interjecting earlier, but that was why. So I made the motion to postpone indefinitely, and I appreciate the need for more conversation, and I do think that this would be best served in part by a broader conversation amongst us. City manager has put on our agenda, I think it's next week, the opportunity to revisit SD 23, which I think is a perfect starting point for us to have that discussion. I don't know that we have to wait until the end of November to talk about how we're valuing some of these things and how we want to tackle some of these things. They may or may not be ready with a particular plan. I would actually prefer if we didn't necessarily have a plan, but that we were having a discussion. And I would say that I want to include there, how do we increase funding for our parks and how do we increase access to our parks? And I don't think this should be solely focused on the parkland dedication ordinance and that fee. So, you know, with those kind of broad parameters for the discussion, I think it would be healthy. I think it'd be healthy for us to be able to have more time when we're actually trying to figure out jointly what our priorities are and how do we problem solve and what different pieces of the equation we can each bring to that, you know, in terms of perspective to help us to tackle the issues that are before us. So I certainly would welcome the general suggestion, you know, as part of that motion.
Motion before us is to postpone indefinitely. Councilmember Kelly, you have a discussion on this issue?
Just after the further clarity from the other conversations we had, I can now support the indefinite postponement. Thank you.
Sounds good. Let's take a vote. Those in favor of postpone indefinitely, please raise your hand. Those opposed? I think it's you. Opposed. Councilmember Renteria votes no. The others voting aye. Councilmember Kassar off the dais. Mayor Pro Tem, you voted in favor of the postponed indefinite? Okay, so the vote then is 9-1-1. This matters postponed indefinitely. One thing we have left is the briefing. Do we want are we ready to move into the briefing? Do you want to take a break? What's the pleasure?
I believe we're ready. I'm going to look for ACM Ariano.
I think he's in the back room.
Here he comes.
Oh,
All right.
Let's do it.
We're going to swap.